Hello everybody, thanks for joining in. So this one, I'm afraid, is just a radio interview with Richard. It was pretty cool though. A different subject this time. He's promoting his book called An Appetite for Wonder, which he covers his early childhood. It's a biography. It's just the first part. Well, anyway, you can hear it in the context of the interview. So, yeah, I'm sorry it's just a radio interview, but it's very, very interesting. He's never focused on his own personal life before, his early childhood, and, you know, he's a quite reticent man to talk about his personal life. So anyway, make a cup of tea, put the kettle on or something like that, or play solitaire, but enjoy the interview, and thanks for watching. Bye-bye.
Richard Dawkins is one of the best-known scientists in Britain. As a writer, his books such as The Selfish Gene, Unweaving the Rainbow and The Ancestor's Tale all bring evolutionary theory to a popular audience. An advocate for science and rationalism, he's also famous, or some might say infamous, for his championing of atheism, and his book The God Delusion has sold over 2 million copies. He joins us today, though, to discuss a different kind of book. It's a change from previous works. It's a memoir, which for the first time tells the personal story of his early life up to becoming a household name. Richard Dawkins joins us from Oxford. Richard, good morning.
Good morning.
Now, why did you decide to tell all about your early life at this stage?
Publishers asked me to, I suppose, is the honest answer. I do feel a bit self-conscious about it. I mean, it's a bit self-indulgent writing your own story. But we'll see whether anybody's interested.
Part of the reason, I suppose, is that you had a resource, a very important resource, still available to you, your mother.
Well, yes. She's 96 and she has an excellent memory for things long ago. And so I've been talking to her about my childhood and making notes. She made notes herself, actually. She kept diaries from time to time and wrote memoirs from time to time for the family. And they've been immensely useful to me. And I've actually quoted from them quite extensively.
Now, this is only going to be volume 1. There will be a second volume because this is up to the publication of The Selfish Gene.
Yes, there's about halfway through my life so far, age of 35 when I wrote The Selfish Gene. So it's childhood, school days, university, and early life as a scientist culminating in The Selfish Gene, which sort of marked a watershed moment in my life. My life rather changed after that.
And we'll talk about that in a moment. But I wanted to inquire about your parents, John, your father, and Jean, your mother. Was he a botanist?
He read botany at Oxford. He then went into the British Colonial Service in Africa. Tropical agriculture became his speciality, and he went out to what was then Nyasaland, now Malawi, as a very junior agricultural officer.
And your mother was an art student?
She was an art student. She'd studied art at art school in London, and she illustrated a book. But then she got married, became a mother, and so she no longer did professional art, but she has done art throughout her life, much to the joy of her family.
Now, one of the things that people may not be aware of is that your childhood, I suppose, by today's standards, might be regarded as exotic.
Well, I was brought up until the age of 8 in Africa, which I suppose is fairly exotic. It was quite common for British children at that time, many in India, many in Africa. So it was quite standard, quite normal.
You do remember it, though, as being a very, very happy time.
Yes, I had a happy childhood. Boarding school is not to everybody's taste, and I suppose boarding school at 7 could be regarded as a bit young, but certainly family life at home was very happy.
In terms of thinking back to that childhood, I mean, you were given an Anglican religious I won't say upbringing because it was just part of a very complicated life. Were you religious as a boy?
Yes, I mean, I suppose most children are if they're sent to religious schools, as I was. So I used to go to chapel every day and took part in the normal Anglican services.
At the same time, your mother pointed out to you when you were about 9 years old, what you're practicing and what you're worshipping is one version of religion. There are others.
Yes, I think that's something that every child needs to realize at some point, that the religion in which they're brought up is just an arbitrary accident. And if they were brought up in some other part of the world, they would almost certainly be believing something different, which is not a very confidence-inspiring reason to believe anything.
You mentioned going to boarding school as a very young child at 7 years of age, and it wasn't necessarily to your liking. You've recently got into hot water about your remarks about mild pedophilia not doing you and other people, other fellow students, any harm. Did that derive from that time or subsequently?
Well, subsequently, when I was about 11. I want to say something about that because I've been rather hurt by some of the reaction to that, as though I'm somehow making light of those people who really have suffered badly from paedophilia, which is, of course, an appalling thing. And children who have been abused year after year by a parent or by a priest really do have their lives blighted and cursed by that. And so, since the experience that I had was so slight compared to that, I would have felt that I was in a way trivializing the experience of those people who've had it really, who were really badly affected by paedophilia, if I were to complain that the minor sort of touching up that I received was anything like in the same class as that. It most certainly wasn't. I would never dream of saying that the slight unpleasantness that I suffered was the worst thing that ever happened to me or something, because it wasn't. But to say that would be to downgrade the horror of a real paedophiliac experience, which unfortunately, as we're increasingly realizing, many children did suffer, have suffered.
You wonder, though, whether or not you proved to be somewhat resistant to those trivial touches, if you like, whereas other boys might have been more vulnerable and perhaps worse things happened.
Well, it only happened to me once, and to other people it happened day after day, week after week, year after year, and they were sworn to secrecy, as it might be by a priest or by an uncle or something of that sort, too frightened to go and tell anybody else. This is real suffering. This is really terrible. And I would hate to trivialize that by complaining about the mild thing that happened to me.
Someone commenting here, Robert in Kilkenny, he says, Richard Dawkins, the man who thinks that mild pedophilia is not harmful, but being a child brought up with a faith or religion is child abuse. Weird man. What do you say to people?
Well, thank you for that. Weird indeed. When you think that a child is taught about hell and is taught that if you sin, you go to hell forever, you roast in hell, your skin peels off and then renews again, can anybody seriously tell me that that is not worse than a little mild touching up which you forget about within a week?
On the contrary, we have from Ben, Richard Dawkins is a man who makes his living from talking sense. I could listen to him all day long. We'll move on from comments to the Selfish Gene as a book. I mean, it changed your life. You adverted to that a few moments ago, but it was 10 years in the making, really.
Yes, well, it's true that I recently found lecture notes that I had written in 1966, which is exactly 10 years before The Selfish Gene was published, in which, I'd forgotten this, but in which the central theme of The Selfish Gene is very clearly laid out. So the students that I lectured to at Oxford and Berkeley, California, were getting, as it were, a 10-year preview of The Selfish Gene.
I mean, the thesis of that for the lay person listening in is it's about the gene survives long after the host, you and me, have perished.
That is the central thesis, and it's not original with me. It actually follows logically from the version of Darwinism that grew up in the 1930s with the rise of population genetics, when it became clear that what's really going on in evolution is differential survival of genes in gene pools. Some genes become more numerous, others become less numerous, and the way the genes achieve their long-term survival, is by manipulating bodies like us, like eagles, like dinosaurs, like fish, manipulating bodies into doing whatever is necessary to preserve them. And so we are, as I put it in The Selfish Gene, survival machines for our genes.
That might bring people to a notion of God, strangely enough, saying, the genetic DNA, in fact, is God.
Well, you can stretch words like that if you like, but I think it's rather unhelpful, and I'm sure you think it's unhelpful as well. That is not what people mean by God. If they meant that by God, there would be no point in worshipping it. There'd be no point going to church, and there'd be no point confessing your sins. If God is simply DNA, then we can all live with that, but that isn't what people mean by God.
What, therefore, do you think of people who flock to Mecca, people who flock to Rome, the Vatican, people who flock to Lourdes in the search of, if not a cure, for some sense of consolation?
Well, consolation is all very well. I think they're deluded. I don't blame people for seeking consolation. But if something is consoling, it's important to understand that doesn't make it true.
When people hear you, often they're offended by those kind of comments, which are, I suppose, to put it at its harshest, treating them as idiots and fools.
I never use strong language. I always simply use rational language. I speak calmly and quietly about it. If people get the point, they get the point. Surely it's a simple enough point that if believing in X gives you hope and gives you comfort, that's fine, but it doesn't make it true. Anybody can understand that. It's rational, it's logical, it's not insulting, it's just simple sense.
Now, in spite of the fact that you speak calmly and rationally without using offensive language, sometimes people take it as such offensive language. Your contention, based on a numerical analysis, that Trinity College, Cambridge, has more Nobel laureates to its name than Islam.
I should have said Jews have enormously more. Jews have won something between 1/5 and 1/4 of all Nobel Prizes, which is an astonishing fact.
Yeah, I mean, this accusation of Islamophobia that was thrown at you, how did you react to that?
Islam was great at the Middle Ages and before, and producing great thinkers and actually contributing a lot to science. Nothing has happened in the last 500 years. And I get a bit fed up with Muslim apologists coming up to me and saying, you can get all the science you want from the Quran, that kind of thing. So it was in response to that kind of boast that I made that tweet.
And of course, you've mentioned that in the Middle Ages that the Muslims were extremely good scientists, making all sorts of breakthroughs. You also mentioned that Jewish people make great breakthroughs and have won Nobel Prizes. And they would say, well, religion isn't all bad if it can produce these kind of results.
Well, which religion? I mean, are you suggesting that the Jewish religion does and the Muslim religion doesn't? Maybe that's an interesting point. I prefer to say perhaps not religion in this case, but cultural tradition. There may be something about the Jewish cultural tradition that leads people to intellectual pursuits.
Well, on that particular note, we have to leave it there. Richard Dawkins' book, An Appetite for Wonder, is published by Bantam Press. It's on sale now in hardback. The price is £20, something a little bit more, I'm sure, in euro. But Richard, thank you very much for joining us from the Oxford studio.
Thank you.